So we're going to look at the Vashti and Esther dichotomy. And so we're first going to look at and see how it developed and why it developed and some of the realities today, because most people think of Vashti, there's throughout history for many years, it was good queen, bad queen, not so good looking, smart, not so smart. There's been a tremendous dichotomy that has been put into action through rabbinic literature. There are commentators, their sages, for whatever reason, didn't like Vashti, not because of anything that Vashti did, but didn't like her because they tried to make Esther really, wonderful. But in making Esther wonderful, they ignore something that we always teach little kids. We always talk about these, little girls that dress up as Esther, and we talk about how pretty they are, and we have this vision that Esther's this beautiful person, not in the rabbinic perspective. In fact, what she looks like is totally irrelevant to the rabbinic perspective, but the reason is really interesting. So we're going to start off. With just talking about Vashti. Now, Vashti is introduced in the Book of Esther in your books on. Let me grab that up here. One sec. Sure. So we're going to look at the first few verses in chapter 1, which specifically talks about the Book of Esther. It talks about Vashti. So pay attention, and I'll show you where to really kind of focus on. So it starts off, for no fewer than 180 days, he displayed the vast riches of his kingdom and the splendid glory of his majesty. At the end of this period, a king gave a banquet for 7 days in the court of the king's palace garden for all people who lived in the fortress Shushan, high and low alike. There were hangings of white cotton and blue wool, caught up by the cords of fine linen, purple wool to silver rods and alabaster columns. There were couches of gold and silver on a pavement of marble, alabaster, mother of pearl, and mosaics. Royal wine was served in abundance, as befits a king, in golden beakers of varied design. And the rule for drinking was no restrictions. For the king had given orders to every palace steward to comply with each man's wishes. In addition, Queen Vashti gave a banquet. Now, these two verses here are kind of important. In addition, Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Ahasuerus. On the seventh day, on the seventh day when the king was merry with wine, he ordered Menuchan, Bezerah, Harbona, Bigta, Abcha, and Karkas, the 7 eunuchs on King Ahasuerus, to the 7 eunuchs in attendance to King Ahasuerus, to bring Vashti before the king, wearing the royal, here's his diadem, it's a royal crown, to display her beauty to the peoples and the officials, for she was a beautiful woman. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command. Conveyed by the eunuchs, the king was greatly incensed, and his fury burned within him. So, very quickly, before we go on with anything, why do you think Vashti didn't come? Yeah, Alan, go ahead.
I think she knew what she'd be facing. A bunch of drunk guys ogling her. She's just wearing a crown, nothing else. And
how do you know that?
What?
How do you know that?
Well, that's all he asked her to bring was the crown.
Well,
and
wouldn't
the
that make
rabbis
sense?
Interpreted, I think.
If you're the queen, wouldn't it make sense to tell the queen to wear the crown?
Yeah, you think she was going to be wearing clothes, but it's a drunken brawl. I mean, why should she get into the middle of that? But I think she could have been a little more tactful, perhaps. Maybe if she said, "Well, I'm not feeling well," it would have been a better way.
Okay.
So the king wouldn't have been so. Instead of, "I'm angry, I'm not going to this party. You're a bunch of drunks."
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, well, that's a very traditional view. But let's kind of look a little. We're going to look a little bit at the commentators and see what they have to say. So the first one. Let's see. Can everyone see this?
No.
Oh, you needed to say that. Why is that happening? Why is it showing that? I don't know. This is really weird. Hold on. Very, very strange. All right. Well, instead of trying to share and fix it, I'll fix it later. And we'll kind of figure it out. But so the second, if you may have it in front of you, the source number 2 shows is from a midrash called Abba Gorion. It's kind of a late, it's about a 2nd century midrash, 117. He's commenting on before the king wearing a royal crown. Rabbi Abba said that she should appear with nothing on her but the crown that is naked. That's where the concept came, that she wasn't wearing anything. It's the only source that says that. And it's ignored, by the way, except by everybody who thinks it's funny. So
okay, so that wasn't, because I read that. I thought,
so,
well, they want her to come naked.
well, see, it's interesting how things kind of get how things get started, so to speak. How everybody, how everything kind of like builds up, and they hear one thing and say, okay, that must be the reason. So, but the problem is that the rabbis weren't going to, they were not going to simply say she refused to come because she didn't, that she was being naked. There had to have been other reasons. In other words, why wouldn't she want to come if she's the queen? Whether clothed or not, what was the issue? So in the Babylonian Talmud in Tractate Megillah, which is the section that talks about the story of Purim and the other Megillot, but Queen Vashti refused, commenting on that same verse, says she was libertine. For did not the master say both had a sinful purpose? Why didn't she come? In other words, she was kind of being her liberty. She was kind of like trying to make her own decisions, but she chose not to come. Why? Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina says this teaches that she got skin lesions. Another Tanaic early source says Gabriel came and made her a tail. That the angel Gabriel, Bob, you thought that was really funny, that gave her a tail. Thus, she still didn't want to come. So, you think about that. Okay. Yeah.
What's the matter with the rabbis? I mean,
nothing.
Any woman would be a little scared after the guys have been drinking for 7 days.
You're making
they're all drunk.
Ellen, you're making a presumption, and I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop right up here. Does it say that the king married Vashti? Where did Vashti come from? So remember, he's only been in power for 3 years. Chances are that Ahasuerus was not the stupid drunken king that we all love and and make fun of. He may have been a brilliant military genius, because what he does when he first starts the party is he gets all the governors and the military, gives them parties. So he's like gathering their support. Then he does it for the people in Shushan. So now he's first gathered the military and the political support. Now he's gathering the people support, so to speak, by having this big party, by giving them everything, by promising them, oh yeah, you're going to be rich and whatever. I'm sorry, my politics are getting in, but things of that sort. But sorry, I have my window open, believe it or not. It's nice. Thing is that she was the queen beforehand. She was the old queen, so to speak. And by having her come out in the crown, she's acknowledging his power. She's saying, I am your queen. And basically what she's saying in this case, is she's basically saying, wait a minute, I don't support you. Because it does say Vashti was to bring Vashti wearing the royal crown to display her beauty. The issue is that it talks about her being a beautiful woman, but they ignore that. As if, wait a minute, that's not, the issue is she doesn't want to do it. And it's not because she didn't find herself beautiful. It's because she had a tail, she had skin lesions, she had other things about her, and she didn't want to show them off. As if, let's not, let's not rock the boat, whatever, I'm just not going to support you. Okay, it's a very different, but she has some interesting strengths here because she's standing up for what she believes. So, let's look at Esther.
Does it say anywhere that she was already queen before he became the king? That he took over?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. But the thing is that we know that she wasn't his wife because it doesn't talk about that. It talks about Esther being married to the king. It doesn't talk about Vashti. And if you use the text as your reference, you got to kind of pick up what it has there. He had lots of other stuff, tons of stuff that went on. And she's giving a banquet for the women, as the queen, she's doing something for the women. So she's already doing something as queen. Whether she came with him, if she truly was his wife, there's a chance that she may, maybe she just didn't want to come in. For whatever reason, she was saying, you are not in charge of me. That's basically what she said. In essence, that's what she said. But the rabbis don't give her a lot of credit. All they give her is the credit for something must have been wrong with her. She must have had a tail. She must have had skin lesions, something of that sort. And they kind of like leave it at that. And it's almost by saying that, well, because of this, she's now the bad queen because she doesn't listen. Now look what it says about Esther. And this drives me crazy for just a moment here. Very curious why my share screen's not working. Nope, still not. Okay. All right. Do animals perceive God? That is a miscellaneous question. I don't know. Interesting question. Let's talk about it tomorrow or Thursday. All right. So in the book of Esther, chapter 2 is where Esther gets invited. It says, and he, Mordecai, adopted Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter. She had neither father nor mother, and the maiden was of beautiful form and beautiful looks. Now, this text is very specific. Esther, beautiful form, beautiful looks. And when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her for his own daughter. So it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was published, when many maidens were gathered together into the Shushan, the castle, the custody of Haggai, Esther was taken into the king's house to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. And the maiden pleased him, and she performed kindness before him. Now, I want some words that are really important. In Hebrew, Yafat To'ar Tovat Bar'eh, she was beautiful form and beautiful looks. And then Vatisa Chesed Lefanav, she performed kindness before him. So Esther's performing some kind of kindness for the Haggai, the keeper of the women, and he speedily gave her ointments with her potions and 7 maidens who were worthy to be given out to her at the king's house, and he advanced her and her maidens to the best place in the house of women. Esther did not reveal her nationality or her lineage, for Mordecai ordered her not to reveal it. So my text skips to verse 15. Now, when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was to go into the king, she required nothing but what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of women, appointed. Esther obtained favor in sight of all of them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus, into his house royal, in the 10th month, which is the month of Tevet, in the 7th year of his reign. So keep in mind, it's the 3rd year when he's having the party. He's now in his 7th year. And the king loved Esther above all the women. She performed grace and favor in his eyes. Chen v'chesed lefanav. Same verses as what she did with Haggai, more than all the other virgins. And he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast unto all his princes and servants of Esther's feast. He made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the bounty of the king. When the virgins were gathered together the 2nd time, Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther had not made known her lineage or her people, as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai. Like as when she was brought up by him. So, yes, Ellen.
It sounds from this portion that Vashti had been queen and was no longer queen, was gone. This was later on.
But we still don't have him. We still don't have her as a wife, even though the punishment where all wives have to listen to the husband, there's no direct connection between Vashti and Ahasuerus.
But you just said in the passage that he made Esther queen instead of Vashti.
Well, Vashti was queen.
That's the issue. She was queen.
Well, she was queen, but she wasn't exactly married.
What?
Vashti may not have been married to Ahasuerus.
Even though she was queen, how would she be queen if she wasn't married to him?
Because if he conquered the land, he took over as part of the conquering, he got the old queen. That story repeats because that's what happens to David and Michal. when David conquers and brings the ark back to Jerusalem, Michal is kind of like sitting there, and she ends up becoming his wife, but almost out of default because she, her father's been killed and she's got nowhere else to go. So, but that's a separate issue. So, but here's the issue: Esther has got this is loved. But the issue is that she performs kindness with Haggai, and she performs grace and favor in his eyes. What does that tell you about Esther? What can you tell me? Don't tell me she's beautiful. What else can you tell me about Esther?
She's kind, loving, and knows how to win favor.
Politically astute.
Yeah, she's politically astute. She's not an idiot. She's not an idiot. Mordecai is the idiot in the story. Haman wants to kill all the Jews. Why? Because Mordecai won't bow down. If King Charles walked into the to the building, we may shake his hand. But if you're in England and King Charles shows up, what do?
You bow.
You bow. Is that bowing before a false god? No. Yeah, so now, mind you, the commentaries for Mordecai are great because they say, well, he had an idol, Haman had an idol, on his belt or something like that. They kind of give him excuses. But Mordecai's decision put the Jewish people in peril. Esther's decision saved them. So let's go on, but let's look at this particular section on Esther.
I heard
First of all, it says, and he adopted Hadassah. Why does Esther have two names? He says, here she's called Hadassah. She's also called Esther. So the question is, why does she have two names? It was taught, Rabbi Meir said, this is in Megillah again, excuse me, her name is Esther. Why was she called Hadassah? Hadassah is also the Hebrew word for myrtle. The myrtle leaves on a lulav and etrog, those little things that look like, kind of like the shape of your eyes, in honor of the righteous ones who are compared to myrtle. As it says, and he stands among the myrtle, from the prophet Zechariah, who says the righteous people stand among the myrtle. Rabbi Yehuda says her name is Hadassah. Why was she called Esther? She's called Esther because she hides her words. The word for hide is maseret, which supposedly sounds like Esther. So, similar letters. But it says Esther did not tell which nationality she has. So she was like hiding something. That's why she was called Esther. Rabbi Nehemiah says, no. Her name is Hadassah. Why was she called Esther? Because the nations of the world called her Esther, like Ishtar, the moon. That was one other. This, by the way, this is like a much later commentary. Ben Azai says Esther was not tall or short. She was average, like a Hadass, like a myrtle. Myrtle leaves are very average. But Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says Esther had a sallow green complexion, like the complexion of a myrtle, and the thread of kindness was strung over her. So she had this, like this thread of kindness over her. She was like a complexion of myrtle. By the way, parenthetically, we're doing Wicked. What if you know anything about Wicked? Elphaba is what color?
Green.
Green, and so is Esther. How do we know? Because she's like a myrtle. Yay! Okay. Don't you think I figured that out? But, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says it's because she had this thread of kindness. So Rashi comments that that's why she appeared beautiful to all the nations and to Achashverosh, because she had this thread of kindness on her. It was like that's what portrayed this beautiful thing. Why don't they say Esther's beautiful?
Beauty is evident. Beauty is passing, whereas interior beauty stays forever, right?
All of these commentaries, most of these commentators are making comments during the Roman occupation. And remember, in Rome, it was illegal to teach Torah. So this is their way of fighting back, because what was considered excuse me, what was considered, like one of the top things you can do in the Greco-Roman culture, beauty. They admired the human body, both male and female. I mean, that's why we talk about the naked athletics. So they were actually trying to move away from beauty and say this had nothing to do with it, but they were still trying to separate the women by saying, Vashti had this tail, Vashti had this, Vashti had that, and yet still, And yet still there was, it was like Esther who had all these things, the thread of kindness. She looked like a myrtle. She was hiding something. I mean, they were trying to come up with all these reasons, or whatever, essentially to kind of like split them up, making it the bad queen versus the good queen. Yeah, Ellen.
Yeah. I want to disagree about Mordecai. I think he was trying to make a point that God comes before any king. And in the Bible, we're taught that God is you only bow to God, not to humans, not to images, not to idols, not to. I mean, I think Mordecai, although he put the Jews in danger, I mean, there are many stories like Hannah and her 7 sons don't bow down to the king.
Yeah, but Esther's an interesting case here because it says another section commentator. It says Esther was also a prophetess, as a prophet, as it's written, and it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther clothed herself in royalty. The rabbis talk about that. That's what she was wearing. Esther clothed herself in royal garments. Rather, this alludes to the fact that she clothed herself with the divine spirit of inspiration. It's written here, she clothed herself, as it's written elsewhere, and the Spirit clothes Amasai in the book of Chronicles. Just as a reference to being enclosed by a spirit, so too Esther was enclosed by a spirit of divine inspiration. So by saying that, what they're doing again is splitting up the Vashti and Esther issue. Vashti was a non-believer, Esther is a prophet. Vashti had a tail, Esther, had this a thread of kindness that everyone loved about her, kind of like the magic bracelet or something like that. And just about a few years ago, just right at COVID, actually the year after COVID, there was a new flag that came up, and I have a picture of it. I'm not going to show you. It's a flag that had a picture of Vashti and Esther on it. It was created by a group called Moving Traditions. Rabbi Tamara Cohen created it, and she says the following: by placing Esther and Vashti on the same flag, we are challenging ourselves to move beyond the dichotomy of bad queen, good feminist, bad feminist, and embrace a wider spectrum of possibility for women's leadership. Then, in the early days of Jewish feminism, Vashti was resurrected and celebrated for her open defiance of the king and her powerful defense of her body and sexuality. Not surprisingly, as Vashti's popularity grew, Esther fell out of favor. Feminists were not sure they could accept 2 different models of powerful women. For some, Esther suddenly became a negative symbol for all women who use their sexuality, enjoy their beauty, fear confrontation, and remain married to power. These interpretations of Esther minimized her courage in directly confronting both Achashverosh and Haman, and in coming out, in quotes, as a Jew after years of hiding her identity. They also ignore Esther's powerful role as an innovator of communal ritual action in her calling for a public fast. With these new flags, we hope to move away from the paradigms of good girl, bad girl, good feminist, bad feminist, to explore the relationship between Esther and Vashti and all that they have come to symbolize. Celebrating Vashti along with Esther also gives us a ritual means to balance the antagonism inspired by Haman with the celebration of how much we have to gain by listening and not simply blotting out. Vashti is not evil like Haman or a fool like Achashverosh. She is a non-Jewish woman who, because of her own suffering at the hands of the more powerful, has much in common with both Mordecai and Esther, and can therefore serve on a narrative and symbolic level as a teacher, model, and ally. The whole idea is that what Vashti and Esther both did was show leadership in very different ways. There's no question that for women in the Bible, and for women to have made the story continue the way it did, to come out the way it did in terms of how they had to manipulate things. The stories of Judah and Tamar are very, very much in there. I mean, Tamar used, disguised herself as a prostitute. Judah got her pregnant, and he was the father-in-law, and thus, as a result, she had a child named Perez, who ends up becoming King David's great grandfather. So it's kind of interesting to see how the story moves like that, and you'll find that throughout the Torah, how women use what they were able to use in the power to keep the story going. Vashti refused to use that. We said, no, listen, I'm a person. And Esther using what she was able to manipulate not only the king and Haman and Mordecai, but also be the head of a community. Say, look, we have to do a fast, a 3-day fast. If someone's going to declare that, you're not going to do it just because, if I told everyone, okay, today's a fast day because we're mourning for X, it'll have some effect, but not near the effect if Rabbi Matt says the same thing. So she becomes a very, very powerful community leader as a result, and is able to kind of like change the story. So that's a new, different little thing on Purim and Vashti. So this, Thursday night when you hear the Megillah in all its glory of how, or I hope you're going to be able to hear it, given the fact we have kids in the play. But at least wave to them and smile. It'll be, think about it just from a little different perspective. What we're going to do for the next 3 or 4 weeks is we're going to just focus on Passover. So, bear with me. We're just going to have a lot of different things on the Passover and the Haggadah, and talk a little bit about how to make this year just a very meaningful year in our different scenario. All right, folks. Great.
Thank you. Very
Thank you,
good.
Ari. Nice seeing you all.
Nice seeing you all. And Bob will
Sure.
talk about animals and God. I have no idea. Talk to you later, folks. Take care.
Yeah.